The white businessman's jaw drops as Jasmine Washington, the black woman he just reported to security, strides confidently into the cockpit. "This is your captain speaking," her voice announces over the intercom. His complaint about her not belonging in first class suddenly feels like the least of his problems. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If this kind of real-life drama interests you, hit that like button and subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next in this shocking encounter that completely flips the script on prejudice at 30,000 feet. Jasmine Washington's alarm blared at exactly 4:30 in the morning. Her hand reached out automatically to silence it, her body already conditioned to the early rising that came with her profession. At 32 years old, she was one of the rare black female commercial airline captains in the country. A distinction that came with both pride and pressure. The pre-dawn routine was sacred to her. Jasmine moved through her Atlanta apartment with practiced efficiency, brewing coffee while reviewing her flight plans one final time. Today's journey would take her from Atlanta to San Francisco, where she would captain a transatlantic flight to London. But first, she needed to catch her commuter flight to California. As she stood before the bathroom mirror, carefully applying minimal makeup, Jasmine's thoughts drifted to her childhood bedroom walls, once plastered with aviation posters and model airplanes hanging from the ceiling. Those dreams had seemed impossible then, a little black girl from South Atlanta wanting to command the skies. "They'll never let someone like you fly those planes," her high school guidance counselor had told her, suggesting more realistic career paths. Jasmine's grip tightened on her mascara wand at the memory. Her cell phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The screen displayed "Dad," and Jasmine's expression immediately softened. "Morning, baby girl," came the deep, familiar voice of William Washington. A former Air Force mechanic, he had been the one to plant the seeds of aviation in her young mind, taking her to air shows and letting her help with small repairs on military aircraft when supervisors weren't looking. "Morning, Dad. Just getting ready for my flight. Got your pre-flight checklist all done?" It was their little joke, him treating her morning routine like the professional checklist she'd run through later. "Yes, sir. Coffee, breakfast, weather check, flight plan review." "That's my captain," he said, the pride evident in his voice. "You know, I was watching the news last night. Another incident with a black passenger being removed from first class on some airline. Made me think of you." Jasmine sighed. "Yeah, I saw that too. Apparently, having the money for the ticket isn't enough proof you belong there. You be careful out there, Jazzy. People still don't expect to see someone who looks like you in a position of authority." "Tell me about it," she replied, thinking of the countless times passengers had mistaken her for a flight attendant despite her captain's uniform. 14 years flying, and people still do a double take when I walk into the cockpit." After hanging up, Jasmine opened her closet and considered her options. Today, she would travel as a passenger on the commuter flight to San Francisco before changing into her uniform. She selected a comfortable yet professional outfit. Dark jeans, a burgundy blouse, and a tailored black blazer. Professional enough to be respected, casual enough to be comfortable for the 6-hour flight. Jasmine had learned early that appearance mattered more for her than her white colleagues. Too casual, and she'd be treated with suspicion. Too formal, and she'd stand out uncomfortably. The balance was exhausting to maintain, but necessary. She packed her captain's uniform carefully in her carry-on, making sure it would remain crisp for her London flight. Her first officer would be Tyler Simmons, a young white pilot she'd worked with several times before. He was competent and respectful, never questioning her authority or expertise, something she unfortunately couldn't take for granted with all her colleagues. As she prepared to leave, Jasmine checked her airline employee app and confirmed she could upgrade herself to first class on the commuter flight. The perk was one of the few benefits that made the job stress worthwhile. Besides, 6 hours in economy before captaining a 10-hour international flight wasn't ideal for maintaining the focus and energy her job demanded. Driving to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Jasmine mentally prepared herself for the day ahead. According to statistics she'd read recently, less than 1% of commercial airline pilots were black women. She was literally 1 in 1,000, a reality that weighed on her daily. Every action, every decision, every interaction felt representative of not just herself, but all black women in aviation. The weight of being a first, or only, in professional spaces wasn't new to Jasmine. From flight school where instructors had scrutinized her skills more harshly than her white male classmates, to her first commercial job where passengers regularly questioned her credentials, she developed a thick skin and impeccable professionalism. Pulling into the employee parking section, Jasmine spotted her colleague Ayanna Phillips walking toward the terminal. Another black female pilot, a rare sight that always brought a smile to her face. They exchanged warm greetings and caught up briefly before heading to separate gates. "Safe travels, Captain Washington," Ayanna said with a wink. "You too, First Officer Phillips. The skies are ours today." It was their shared affirmation, a reminder that they belonged in the cockpit despite anyone who might suggest otherwise. With renewed determination, Jasmine headed to her gate, mentally preparing for both the expected and unexpected challenges of the day ahead. Jasmine arrived at Gate A23 30 minutes before boarding was set to begin. The flight to San Francisco was scheduled for an on-time departure, and the waiting area was already filling with business travelers in pressed suits, families corralling excited children, and solo travelers immersed in their devices. She used her priority boarding status to secure her spot near the front of the line, subtly observing her surroundings. A habit formed from years of situational awareness training as a pilot. The digital boarding pass on her phone displayed her seat assignment, 3A, a window seat in first class. When the gate agent called for first-class passengers, Jasmine stepped forward confidently. She noticed a few glances from other passengers, some curious, some dismissive, but she had long ago learned to maintain her composure under scrutiny. She handed her digital boarding pass to the agent, who scanned it with a smile. "Have a wonderful flight, Ms. Washington," the agent said. "Thank you," Jasmine replied, walking down the jetway with her carry-on rolling behind her. Upon entering the aircraft, she was greeted by Samantha Bailey, a flight attendant with blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun and bright blue eyes that crinkled when she smiled. "Welcome aboard," Samantha said warmly, then her eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Oh, Captain Washington. I didn't realize you were on this flight." Jasmine smiled. "Just Jasmine today. I'm positioning to San Francisco for my London flight." "Of course. Can I get you anything once we're in the air? Coffee how you like it?" Samantha had served on several flights Jasmine had captained and remembered her preference for black coffee with a single sugar. "That would be perfect, thank you." Jasmine made her way to her seat, stowing her carry-on in the overhead bin before settling into 3A. She pulled out her tablet, opening a digital flight manual she'd been studying about the new safety protocols for turbulence management. As she focused on her reading, a shadow fell across her screen. Looking up, she saw a middle-aged white man with salt and pepper hair and an expensive-looking suit placing his briefcase in the bin above her head. His Rolex gleamed as he adjusted his cufflinks, and his cologne, something overpriced and overpowering, wafted into her space. He glanced down at her, then at the seat number above her head, then back at his boarding pass. A flicker of annoyance passed over his face before he took his seat beside her in 3B. Anthony Pearson considered himself a man of importance. As the CEO of a mid-sized tech company, he was accustomed to deference and respect. First-class travel was his norm, and he had expectations about the type of people he would encounter in the premium cabin. The young black woman next to him, dressed in what he considered casual attire, didn't match his mental image of a first-class passenger. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, putting as much distance between himself and Jasmine as the first-class seat would allow. When Samantha approached with pre-departure beverages, her familiar greeting to Jasmine irritated him further. "Your coffee will be ready once we're in the air, Jasmine," Samantha said with genuine warmth. Thanks, Sam, Jasmine replied. Anthony cleared his throat loudly. Excuse me, I'll have sparkling water with lemon, he interjected, deliberately cutting off their conversation. Of course, sir, Samantha replied professionally, her smile becoming slightly more fixed. When she left, Anthony pulled out his phone, ostentatiously checking emails until the announcement came to put electronic devices in airplane mode. He noticed Jasmine reading what appeared to be technical aviation documents and frowned. Are you in the industry? He asked, his tone suggesting he found the idea improbable. Yes, Jasmine answered simply, not elaborating. Years of experience had taught her that the less information she volunteered to strangers with that tone, the better. Her brevity seemed to annoy him further. I fly over 100,000 miles a year, he stated, as if this established his authority on all things aviation-related. I've never seen you on this route before. I don't usually take this flight, she replied, returning to her reading. As the cabin filled, Anthony's discomfort seemed to grow. When Samantha passed by again, he beckoned her closer and spoke in a voice just loud enough for Jasmine to overhear. Is there another seat available in first class? I think there's been some mistake with the assignments. Samantha checked her tablet. I'm sorry, sir, we're completely full in first class today. Are you sure? He pressed. I'm a Platinum Elite member. I understand, sir, but all seats are assigned and occupied. Is there something wrong with your current seat? Anthony glanced at Jasmine, who continued reading her tablet, outwardly unaffected though internally noting every word. No, it's fine, he said curtly. As the flight prepared for takeoff, Jasmine put away her tablet and gazed out the window, her mind shifting automatically to assess the weather conditions and mentally review takeoff procedures, habits from years in the cockpit. Beside her, Anthony made a show of sanitizing his armrest and tray table, his movements exaggerated as if to create additional space between them. Jasmine had experienced this before. The subtle and not so subtle ways people communicated that they didn't think she belonged in premium spaces. She'd developed strategies for handling these situations, prioritizing her own peace of mind while maintaining her dignity. Today, she chose to simply exist in her rightfully purchased space, neither shrinking to appease his discomfort nor engaging in a confrontation that would only deplete her energy. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, and the familiar sensation of movement triggered Jasmine's professional mindset. She automatically monitored the engine sounds, the rate of acceleration, and the angle of ascent, all data her pilot's mind processed without conscious effort. Beside her, Anthony remained rigid, his body language communicating his continued displeasure at his seating arrangement. As they reached cruising altitude, Samantha appeared with Jasmine's coffee, prepared exactly as promised. Here you go, Jasmine, she said, placing it carefully on her tray table. Are you heading out on the London route today? Yes, I am, Jasmine confirmed with a smile. Anthony's head turned sharply at this exchange, his eyes narrowing as he studied Jasmine with newfound interest and suspicion. The first signs of trouble were brewing, and Jasmine could sense the storm gathering beside her. She'd weathered these storms before, but something about Anthony's expression told her this might be a particularly turbulent flight. Jasmine had just returned from the restroom when it happened. She was settling back into her seat when Anthony shifted his body to face her directly, his expression hardened with unwarranted suspicion. Excuse me, he said, his voice carrying enough to draw attention from nearby passengers. I think you might be in someone else's seat. Jasmine met his gaze calmly. No, this is my assigned seat. 3A. Can I see your boarding pass? He demanded, extending his hand as if he had any authority to verify her right to be there. I don't need to show you my boarding pass, Jasmine replied evenly. This is my seat. Anthony's face flushed. Look, I fly this route regularly, and I know the type of people who usually sit in first class. The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Two passengers across the aisle glanced over, one of them discreetly activating the video recording function on their phone. Sir, I have every right to be here, Jasmine stated firmly. I purchased this seat just like you purchased yours. Anthony scoffed. Purchased? Or got upgraded with some discount points program? Before Jasmine could respond, Samantha appeared at their row, having noticed the escalating tension. Is everything all right here? She asked, her professional demeanor intact despite the obvious discomfort of the situation. This woman is sitting in first class, and I have concerns about whether she belongs here, Anthony said, not bothering to lower his voice. Sir, Samantha replied with forced patience, Ms. Washington is a confirmed first-class passenger on this flight. I can assure you there's no mistake. Can you check again? Anthony insisted. Maybe there was a computer error. Samantha's smile tightened. Sir, there is no error. Ms. Washington is properly seated in her assigned seat. Anthony's jaw clenched. I want to speak to the air marshal on this flight. May I ask why? Samantha questioned, her professionalism beginning to strain. I feel uncomfortable, he stated, glancing meaningfully at Jasmine. There's a suspicious person in first class. Jasmine took a slow, measured breath. She'd experienced microaggressions before, but this man was rapidly moving beyond subtle racism into blatant discrimination. She maintained her composure, knowing from years of experience that showing any emotion would only be used against her. Sir, she said quietly, I'm an airline employee with full benefits and privileges. I have every right to sit in this seat that I've been assigned. An employee? Anthony scoffed. What do you do? Serve drinks? Clean the cabin? A deep voice from across the aisle interrupted. Excuse me, but I think you should stop harassing this woman. Jasmine turned to see an older black man with salt and pepper hair and glasses, dressed in a tailored suit. The man's identification badge partially visible on his belt revealed, Dr. Thomas Johnson, Chief of Neurosurgery. This doesn't concern you, Anthony snapped without looking at Dr. Johnson. When someone is being discriminated against on a public conveyance, it concerns all of us, Dr. Johnson replied calmly. The lady has told you she has a right to be here, and the flight attendant has confirmed it. What more do you need? Anthony finally turned to face Dr. Johnson, his expression dismissive. Look, I'm not going to be lectured about discrimination by what? Dr. Johnson challenged, raising an eyebrow. A black man? A doctor? A concerned citizen? Please, finish your thought. Anthony huffed and turned back to Samantha. I want to speak to your supervisor. This is unacceptable. I'll get the lead flight attendant, Samantha replied, her voice tight. She gave Jasmine an apologetic look before heading toward the front of the cabin. More passengers were now watching the exchange, some with expressions of discomfort, others with open disgust aimed at Anthony. A young woman in row 2 had her phone positioned to record the incident, while an elderly couple whispered to each other with disapproving glances in Anthony's direction. Jasmine remained silent, maintaining her dignity despite the humiliation of being publicly challenged. This wasn't her first encounter with someone like Anthony, and she knew it wouldn't be her last. The difference today was that she had somewhere important to be, a plane full of passengers depending on her to captain them safely across the Atlantic in just a few hours. Anthony pulled out his phone and began typing furiously. I'm contacting airline management directly. I know people in corporate. Sir, Jasmine said firmly, you're making assumptions about me based solely on my appearance, and it needs to stop. I'm making observations based on experience, he countered. And my observation is that you don't belong here. Dr. Johnson leaned forward again. Sir, what you're doing has a name. It's called racial profiling, and it's not only morally wrong but potentially legally actionable. Anthony sneered. Everyone wants to play the race card these days. It's not a card when it's our daily reality, Dr. Johnson replied evenly. Samantha returned with Carlos Rivera, the lead flight attendant, a tall man with a commanding presence and 16 years of experience handling difficult situations at 35,000 feet. What seems to be the problem here? Carlos asked, addressing both Anthony and Jasmine, though his eyes showed recognition when they landed on Jasmine. This passenger is questioning my right to sit in first class, Jasmine explained calmly. He's demanded to see my boarding pass and suggested I don't belong here. Carlos turned to Anthony. Sir, I can assure you that all passengers in this cabin are properly ticketed for first class. If you're uncomfortable, we can see if there's availability in the main cabin where we could reseat you. Anthony's face reddened further. You want to move me? I'm a Platinum Elite member. I spend thousands with this airline every month. Then I'm sure you understand the importance of creating a respectful environment for all our premium passengers, Carlos replied smoothly. Ms. Washington is seated exactly where she should be. Anthony pulled out his phone again. I'm going to call security to meet this plane. I don't feel safe. Sir, please put your phone away. It needs to be in airplane mode during flight, Carlos reminded him. This is an emergency, Anthony insisted, dialing a number. There is no emergency, sir, Carlos stated firmly. If you continue to disrupt the cabin, I'll need to report this incident to the captain. Go ahead, Anthony challenged. And while you're at it, tell them to have security waiting when we land. I'm not convinced she hasn't somehow bypassed security protocols. Jasmine closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. In her 14 years of flying, she'd faced discrimination in many forms, but rarely this blatant, this public, and this sustained. A memory surfaced, her first week as a commercial pilot, when a passenger had refused to board after seeing her in the cockpit. The airline had supported her then, but the incident had left a mark. Opening her eyes, she turned slightly toward Anthony. Sir, I will say this one last time. I am a ticketed passenger in first class. Your discomfort with my presence is not my problem to solve. Please stop harassing me, or I will be forced to file a formal complaint for discriminatory behavior. Anthony laughed dismissively. Go ahead and file your complaint. I have friends in the airline's executive suite who will make sure it goes nowhere. As the confrontation continued, Jasmine discreetly sent a text message to her co-pilot in San Francisco, giving him a heads-up about the situation. If this escalated further, she wanted to ensure her crew was prepared for any potential delays. The message was simple, dealing with a situation on my positioning flight. May need assistance upon arrival. Will update. What Anthony didn't know was that his actions were setting in motion a chain of events that would soon turn his world upside down. The cockpit he so confidently believed was the domain of people who looked nothing like Jasmine was about to become her territory, and his comfortable assumptions were minutes away from a spectacular collision with reality. The tension in the first-class cabin had become palpable. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the confrontation impossible to ignore in the confined space of the aircraft. Anthony had escalated from passive-aggressive comments to open hostility, and Jasmine found herself at the center of unwanted attention. I demand to speak to the captain about this situation, Anthony declared loudly, glaring at Carlos. This is a security issue. Carlos maintained his professional demeanor, though his patience was clearly wearing thin. Sir, the captain is busy flying the aircraft. I'm the lead flight attendant, and I've already confirmed that Ms. Washington is properly seated. Anthony pulled out his phone again, scrolling through his contacts with exaggerated movements. I'm calling Stephen Davis right now. He's a vice president at this airline. Sir, we're at cruising altitude. Your phone needs to remain in airplane mode, Carlos reminded him firmly. Ignoring the instruction, Anthony pressed the phone to his ear. Stephen. It's Anthony Pearson. I'm on flight 1422 to San Francisco, and there's a situation that requires your immediate attention. Whether he was actually connected to someone or merely performing for the benefit of those watching, Anthony spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to having his demands met. Yes, I'll hold while you check. Of course. Yes, that's what I thought. After a moment, he he ended the call with a smug expression. The airline executive confirms there must be a mistake. They're radioing the captain now. Carlos exchanged a skeptical glance with Samantha, both aware that no such communication had come through to the cockpit. Turning to Jasmine, Carlos lowered his voice. Ms. Washington, I apologize for this disruption. Would you prefer to move to another seat to avoid further conflict? We have one open in the last row of first class. Jasmine felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. This was the moment when even well-meaning people often expected her to accommodate racism rather than stand against it. The suggestion, while intended to help, placed the burden of resolution on her rather than on the person causing the problem. No, Carlos, she replied firmly but quietly. I will not move. I have done nothing wrong, and moving would only validate his behavior. Carlos nodded, understanding the principle at stake. I respect that decision. I'll continue to monitor the situation. As Carlos stepped away, Anthony leaned closer to Jasmine, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You're making a big mistake. I have connections with airport security in San Francisco. They'll be waiting for you when we land. Jasmine turned to face him directly, her expression calm but resolute. Are you threatening me, Mr. Pearson? I'm informing you of consequences, he replied. People like you need to learn there's a proper order to things. The phrase, people like you, triggered a memory from Jasmine's past, her first job interview for a major airline, when the interviewer had suggested that people like her might make some passengers uncomfortable in the cockpit. She had overcome that obstacle, as she had overcome countless others, through competence, persistence, and dignified resistance. By now, nearly everyone in the first-class cabin was watching the exchange. Some passengers recorded discreetly with their phones, while others whispered among themselves. The elderly couple from row 1 had stopped pretending not to notice and were openly staring with expressions of concern. Anthony stood suddenly, bumping into the seat in front of him. I need to use the restroom, he announced, though it was clear he simply wanted to escape the growing disapproval from other passengers. As he made his way to the lavatory, Dr. Johnson leaned across the aisle toward Jasmine. Are you okay? That man is completely out of line. I'm fine, Jasmine assured him, though the incident was taking an emotional toll she wouldn't show publicly. Unfortunately, this isn't my first encounter with someone like him. I understand, Dr. Johnson nodded. I've been chief of neurosurgery for 12 years, and I still get asked if I'm the orderly when I walk into certain patients' rooms. When Anthony returned, he had regained his composure and adopted a new strategy. Rather than directly confronting Jasmine, he began loudly speaking to the passenger behind him about security concerns and standard slipping in premium cabins. Jasmine remained focused on her tablet, refusing to engage with his transparent attempts to provoke her. She messaged her colleague in San Francisco again, situation continuing. Passenger threatening to have security meet the plane. May need assistance upon arrival. The response came quickly, understood. We'll have ground staff ready. Your uniform and credentials are in your locker as requested. Have you ever faced a situation where someone questioned your right to be somewhere based solely on your appearance? Comment number 1 if you believe Anthony's behavior is completely unacceptable. Like this video if you think Jasmine is handling this situation with incredible grace under pressure. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of courage in the face of discrimination. What would you do if you were in Jasmine's position? Would you stand your ground like she's doing, or would you move seats to avoid conflict? And what do you think will happen when this flight finally lands in San Francisco? Let's find out as our story continues. The descent into San Francisco International Airport began with the captain's announcement that they would be landing in approximately 20 minutes. Throughout the remainder of the flight, Anthony had maintained a steady stream of phone calls, despite repeated reminders about the airline's electronics policy, and thinly veiled comments about proper protocols and security concerns. Jasmine had retreated into focused silence, reviewing notes for her upcoming transatlantic flight on her tablet while ignoring Anthony's provocations. Dr. Johnson had engaged in conversation with her occasionally, discussing their respective careers and effectively creating a buffer against Anthony's hostility. As the aircraft's wheels touched down on the runway, Anthony's expression shifted to one of smug anticipation. He made a show of checking his watch and then typing something on his phone. "They'll be waiting," he muttered, just loud enough for Jasmine to hear. She didn't respond, focusing instead on gathering her belongings and preparing to deplane. Her phone vibrated with a message from her first officer, ground staff aware of situation. Operations Manager Phillips waiting at gate. The aircraft taxied to the gate, and the familiar chime indicated it was safe to use cellular devices. Anthony immediately made another call. "Yes, Flight 1422 from Atlanta," he said loudly. "Gate C-17. First class cabin, seat 3A. "That's right. Thank you." Carlos made the standard announcement about deplaning procedures, adding, "Please remember that all passengers deserve respect and courtesy. Thank you for flying with us today." When the aircraft door opened, Anthony gathered his belongings quickly, clearly intent on being among the first to exit. Jasmine deliberately took her time, allowing him and several other passengers to deplane ahead of her. Dr. Johnson caught her eye and gave her an encouraging nod before exiting himself. As Jasmine stepped into the jetway, she could see two uniformed airport security officers standing at the gate. Anthony was already approaching them, gesturing animatedly in her direction. His face displayed absolute confidence that his complaint would be taken seriously. Jasmine walked calmly toward the gate, her carry-on rolling behind her. She noticed Samantha and Carlos standing nearby, watching the situation unfold with concerned expressions. "That's her," Anthony was saying as she approached. "I have serious concerns about how she gained access to the first-class cabin, and I believe her credentials should be thoroughly checked." The taller security officer, whose name badge read Jackson, turned toward Jasmine as she approached. His expression was professional but not hostile. "Ma'am," he began, but then recognition flickered across his face. "Captain Washington." Anthony's self-assured expression faltered slightly. "Captain." "Good morning, Officer Jackson," Jasmine replied with a nod. "Is there a problem?" Officer Jackson straightened slightly, his demeanor shifting to one of respect. "No problem, Captain. This gentleman has raised some concerns, but I see you're on our roster for the London flight today." "That's correct," Jasmine confirmed. "I was positioning from Atlanta for that assignment." The second officer, Thompson, was looking between Jasmine and Anthony with growing understanding. "Sir," he addressed Anthony, "you filed a complaint about Captain Washington." Anthony's face had drained of color, his previous confidence evaporating as the reality of the situation dawned on him. "Captain? She's a pilot." "Not just a pilot," Officer Jackson clarified. "Captain Washington is the commanding officer for Flight 876 to London this afternoon." Anthony's mouth opened and closed without producing sound, like a fish suddenly removed from water. The power dynamic he had assumed throughout the flight had just been completely inverted. "There must be some mistake," he finally managed, his voice considerably less authoritative than before. "The only mistake," Jasmine stated calmly, "was your assumption that I didn't belong in first class based solely on my appearance." Several passengers who had witnessed the confrontation on the plane had stopped to watch the exchange, some openly recording with their phones. Samantha and Carlos stood nearby, suppressing smiles at Anthony's evident discomfort. "I didn't. I wasn't." Anthony stammered, clearly searching for a way to salvage the situation and his dignity. "If there's nothing else, officers," Jasmine said, "I need to prepare for my flight." "Of course, Captain," Officer Thompson replied. "We apologize for the inconvenience." As Jasmine began to walk away, Anthony called after her, his tone suddenly conciliatory. "I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding. I was just concerned about security protocols." Jasmine paused and turned to face him. There was no misunderstanding, Mr. Pearson. You made assumptions about me based on my race and gender, and you acted on those assumptions in a way that was disruptive and discriminatory. Anthony's face flushed with embarrassment as nearby passengers nodded in agreement. One person slowly began to clap, and others joined in a spontaneous show of support for Jasmine. I hope this experience causes you to reconsider how you treat people, Jasmine added before continuing on her way, her head held high. As she walked through the terminal toward the staff area, Dr. Johnson fell into step beside her. That, he said with a smile, was absolutely magnificent. Just another day navigating the friendly skies, Jasmine replied with a wry smile. But I appreciate your support during the flight. It was the least I could do, he said. Though I must admit, I didn't realize I was defending a captain. That revelation was priceless. The look on his face, Jasmine agreed, allowing herself a small laugh. Worth every minute of his nonsense. What neither of them knew as they parted ways was that Anthony Pearson's humiliation was only beginning. His connecting flight to London, the critical business trip he couldn't miss, was about to become even more uncomfortable than he could possibly imagine. Jasmine entered the staff area of San Francisco International Airport, greeting colleagues as she made her way to the pilot's lounge. She had 90 minutes before she needed to begin pre-flight preparations for the London route, just enough time to change into her uniform and review the latest weather reports for the transatlantic crossing. At her locker, she found her captain's uniform freshly pressed and waiting. The 4 gold stripes on the sleeves and the wings above the breast pocket represented years of struggle, study, and determination. As she changed, Jasmine reflected on the incident with Anthony Pearson, filing it mentally among the countless other microaggressions and overt discrimination she'd faced throughout her career. Meanwhile, Anthony had made his way to the international terminal, his earlier confidence replaced by lingering embarrassment. He was still processing the revelation that the woman he tried to have removed from first class was actually an airline captain. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant confirming the importance of his London meetings, merger negotiations that could potentially double his company's market value. As he approached the gate for his connecting flight to London, Anthony froze mid-step. Through the large windows overlooking the tarmac, he could see the Boeing 787 Dreamliner that would carry him across the Atlantic. And walking toward that aircraft in full captain's uniform was none other than Jasmine Washington. No, he whispered to himself. It can't be. But it was. The universe, it seemed, had a particularly pointed sense of irony. The black woman he had deemed unworthy of sitting next to him in first class was about to be responsible for flying him safely across an ocean. Anthony approached the gate agent, his voice tight with panic. "Excuse me, is there another flight to London today?" The agent checked her computer. "I'm sorry, sir, all other flights to London today are fully booked. We have space on tomorrow's flight if you'd like to be rebooked." Anthony checked his watch. Delaying until tomorrow would mean missing the first day of negotiations, potentially costing his company millions and damaging his professional reputation. "Is there a problem with today's flight?" the agent asked, noting his distress. "No, I just..." Anthony struggled to find a plausible explanation that wouldn't reveal his predicament. "Never mind. I'll take my assigned flight." As he stepped away from the counter, a hand clapped him firmly on the shoulder. Anthony turned to find Philip Dawson, the airline's operations manager, a tall man with a stern expression and an iPad in hand. "Mr. Pearson. I'd like a word with you before you board," Dawson said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Anthony followed Dawson to a quiet corner of the gate area, his stomach tightening with apprehension. "We've received reports about an incident on your incoming flight from Atlanta," Dawson began, his expression grave. "Several passengers and crew members have filed complaints about your behavior toward one of our captains." "There was a misunderstanding," Anthony began. "I didn't know she was..." "That's just it, Mr. Pearson," Dawson interrupted. "Whether Captain Washington was a pilot, a flight attendant, or a banker is irrelevant. Our airline has a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior toward any passenger or staff member. Anthony swallowed hard. I was merely concerned about security. Please don't insult my intelligence, Dawson cut in. We have multiple witness statements and video recordings. Your concerns were clearly based on Captain Washington's race and gender, not any legitimate security issue. The reality of his situation was beginning to dawn on Anthony. Not only would he be flying with the very person he had tried to have removed from first class, but he might face consequences for his behavior. Am I being denied boarding? He asked, his voice strained. That would be within our rights, Dawson confirmed. However, Captain Washington has been informed of the situation and has agreed to allow you on her aircraft, demonstrating significantly more professionalism than you showed her. Anthony's relief was mixed with fresh humiliation. I see. However, Dawson continued, this incident will be fully documented, and any further discriminatory behavior will result in immediate removal from the aircraft and placement on our no-fly list. Additionally, we'll be reviewing your elite status with our airline in light of these events. The threat to his platinum elite status, a badge of honor Anthony had flaunted during the earlier confrontation, felt like a particularly targeted punishment. I understand, Anthony replied stiffly. I hope you do, Dawson said. Because Captain Washington is one of our finest pilots, and she deserves nothing less than your complete respect and cooperation. As Dawson walked away, Anthony found himself in an impossible situation. His crucial business meetings required him to board this flight, but doing so meant placing his life in the hands of a woman he had publicly disrespected and attempted to have removed from an aircraft just hours earlier. When boarding began for the London flight, Anthony found himself hesitating at the gate. Through the windows, he could see Jasmine in the cockpit, performing pre-flight checks with focused precision. Her captain's hat was positioned perfectly, her uniform immaculate, her demeanor completely professional, a stark contrast to the assumptions he had made about her. Anthony boarded reluctantly, avoiding eye contact with the flight attendants who had witnessed his behavior on the previous flight. As he settled into his first-class seat, he noticed several passengers from the Atlanta flight also continuing on to London. Their expressions ranged from amusement to disapproval as they recognized him. The man who took the seat beside Anthony was Walter Green, a distinguished black businessman in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He nodded politely to Anthony before settling in with a financial newspaper. Quite a morning you've had, Walter remarked casually, not looking up from his paper. Anthony stiffened. Excuse me. I was in row 4 on the Atlanta flight, Walter explained, finally meeting Anthony's gaze. Witnessed the whole unfortunate episode. Anthony shifted uncomfortably. It was a misunderstanding. Was it? Walter asked, his tone conversational but his eyes sharp. Seemed pretty clear from where I was sitting. You saw a black woman in first class and decided she didn't belong there. Before Anthony could formulate a response, the intercom crackled to life, and Jasmine's confident voice filled the cabin. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Jasmine Washington speaking. I'll be commanding your flight to London Heathrow today. Our flight time will be approximately 10 hours and 20 minutes, and we're expecting some light turbulence over the Atlantic. My first officer, Tyler Simmons, and our entire cabin crew are committed to making your journey as comfortable as possible. We'll be beginning our pushback shortly, so please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and all electronic devices are in airplane mode. Anthony's face flushed as he felt the stares of nearby passengers. The voice that had just commanded the attention of the entire aircraft belonged to the woman he had tried to have ejected from first class. The woman whose competence and belonging he had questioned was now responsible for safely flying him and hundreds of others across an ocean. Walter Green observed Anthony's discomfort with quiet interest. Life has a way of teaching us lessons, doesn't it? He remarked. Though some are more public than others. As the aircraft began to taxi, Anthony closed his eyes, trying to process the spectacular reversal of his morning's assumptions. The woman he had deemed unworthy of sitting beside him was now literally at the controls of his fate, guiding the massive aircraft toward the runway with the expertise that came from thousands of hours of training and experience. In the cockpit, Jasmine focused entirely on her pre-takeoff checklist, compartmentalizing the morning's incident. The safety of all passengers, including Anthony Pearson, was her professional responsibility, regardless of personal feelings. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted into the California sky, she felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with commanding such a powerful machine, defying not just gravity but the weight of societal expectations with each flight. 3 hours into the transatlantic journey, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner cruised smoothly at 38,000 feet. In the cockpit, Jasmine monitored the sophisticated flight systems while engaging in professional conversation with her first officer, Tyler Simmons. They had worked together on several international routes and had developed a comfortable rapport. "So," Tyler said during a quiet moment, "I heard there was some trouble on your positioning flight." Jasmine nodded, keeping her eyes on the instruments. "Nothing I haven't dealt with before. Just another passenger who couldn't comprehend that black women can be airline captains." "The operations manager filled me in," Tyler replied. "Apparently, the guy is on this flight." "First class, seat 4B, Jasmine confirmed. Philip offered to deny him boarding, but that seemed excessive. "Besides," she added with a small smile, "I think flying with me as his captain is probably punishment enough for his worldview." In the first-class cabin, Anthony Pearson was attempting to focus on preparing for his business meetings in London, but concentration eluded him. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on him. The woman he had deemed unworthy of sitting beside him in first class was now piloting the aircraft carrying him across the Atlantic. Walter Green, the black businessman seated next to him, had maintained a polite but knowing demeanor since takeoff. During the meal service, he finally broke the extended silence between them. "I've been flying this route monthly for nearly 20 years, he commented casually. "Captain Washington is one of the best pilots on this corridor. Always a smooth flight." Anthony glanced at him, uncertain how to respond. "You know her?" "Not personally," Walter replied, cutting his steak with precision. "But I make it a point to note who's flying the plane I'm on. When you see someone who looks like you in a position few of us occupy, you tend to remember them." "I suppose so," Anthony conceded uncomfortably. Walter set down his cutlery and turned slightly to face Anthony. "You know, I was the first black senior partner at my investment firm. 30 years ago, I'd walk into client meetings, and people would assume I was the assistant, the janitor, sometimes even the entertainment." Anthony stared at his own meal, appetite diminishing. "Even now," Walter continued, "I get pulled aside for random security checks at airports far more often than my white colleagues. I still have shop assistants watching me closely in high-end stores, despite the fact that I could buy most of their inventory without blinking. And occasionally, I still see that look of surprise when I sit down in first class, the same look you gave Captain Washington this morning." "I didn't mean to," Anthony began, but Walter raised a hand. "Intent doesn't negate impact," he said simply. "What matters is recognizing the patterns of our behavior and choosing to change them." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden jolt as the aircraft encountered turbulence. The seatbelt sign illuminated, accompanied by a calm announcement from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Washington. We're experiencing some moderate turbulence as we navigate around a weather system. Please return to your seats and keep your seatbelts fastened until further notice. Cabin crew, please suspend service and secure the cabin." The aircraft pitched and rolled as it encountered air pockets, but Jasmine's handling of the plane remained steady and controlled. In the cockpit, she and Tyler worked in coordinated precision, adjusting their altitude and course to find smoother air while maintaining their optimal flight path. "Weather radar shows a clear path if we climb another 2,000 feet and adjust heading by 5 degrees north, Tyler suggested, studying the instruments. "Agreed," Jasmine replied, already initiating the adjustment. "Let's request the altitude change from ATC." Within minutes, her skillful navigation had guided the aircraft into calmer airspace. The turbulence subsided, and a collective sense of relief spread through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Washington again. We've climbed to a higher altitude to avoid the turbulence and should have a smooth ride from here. Our cabin crew will resume service shortly. Thank you for your patience." As the seatbelt sign turned off, Walter gave Anthony a meaningful look. "Handled that turbulence beautifully, didn't she? That's experience and skill, not luck." Anthony nodded reluctantly. "Yes, she seems competent." "Competent," Walter repeated with a raised eyebrow. Interesting choice of word for someone who just safely navigated a massive aircraft through difficult conditions while responsible for hundreds of lives. Before Anthony could respond, a commotion erupted several rows behind them. A passenger was slumped in his seat, unresponsive, while his traveling companion called urgently for help. "He's not breathing," the woman cried out. "My husband needs help." The lead flight attendant rushed to the scene, quickly assessing the situation before picking up the intercom. "Is there a doctor on board?" Dr. Thomas Johnson, the same neurologist who had defended Jasmine on the Atlanta flight, immediately stood and made his way to the ailing passenger. After a brief examination, he looked up with urgency. "This man is having a severe cardiac event. I need the emergency medical kit and the AED immediately." The cabin crew moved with practiced efficiency, bringing the requested equipment while Dr. Johnson began CPR. The situation was critical, a passenger in cardiac arrest over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, hours from the nearest hospital. In the cockpit, Jasmine received the emergency alert from her cabin crew. "Captain, we have a code red medical emergency. Passenger in cardiac arrest. Dr. Johnson is attending but says the situation is critical." Jasmine immediately began assessing their options, checking their position over the Atlantic and calculating potential diversion airports. "What's our closest viable option?" she asked Tyler, who was already pulling up the relevant data. "Keflavik, Iceland is approximately 90 minutes away at our current speed," he reported. "It's our best option with appropriate medical facilities." Jasmine made her decision instantly. "Contact Keflavik and declare a medical emergency. Request priority landing clearance and ground medical support. I'll update the passengers." She switched to the cabin announcement system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Washington. We have a medical emergency on board and will be diverting to Keflavik, Iceland. Our estimated arrival time is 90 minutes. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions. If there are any additional medical professionals on board, please identify yourselves to the cabin crew." Jasmine then coordinated with air traffic control, adjusting their flight plan for the emergency diversion while communicating with the ground medical team in Iceland. Every decision needed to be made quickly but carefully, balancing the urgent need for medical care against the safety requirements of the aircraft and all passengers. In the cabin, Dr. Johnson had stabilized the patient with the AED and emergency medications from the medical kit, but the man remained in critical condition. "He needs a hospital as soon as possible," Dr. Johnson informed the lead flight attendant. "His condition is temporarily stable but could deteriorate again." The entire aircraft had fallen into a tense silence, passengers united in concern for their fellow traveler. Anthony watched the emergency unfold, observing how the crew worked with calm efficiency under Jasmine's leadership. There was no panic, no hesitation, just professional competence in a life-or-death situation. Walter leaned over to Anthony. "Aviation emergencies reveal character, both in the crew and in passengers. Notice how Captain Washington didn't hesitate to divert the flight, potentially costing the airline thousands of dollars, because a human life is at stake." Anthony nodded silently, a new perspective slowly forming as he watched the situation unfold. The woman he had judged as unworthy of sitting beside him in first class was now making split-second decisions that would determine whether a passenger lived or died. Jasmine's voice came over the intercom again, providing updates on their approach to Iceland and requesting that passengers prepare for an expedited landing procedure. Her tone remained calm and authoritative, instilling confidence throughout the cabin despite the emergency situation. As the aircraft began its descent toward Keflavik, Anthony Pearson found himself reconsidering many of the assumptions that had guided his behavior that morning. The competence, leadership, and humanity demonstrated by Captain Washington during this crisis contradicted everything he had initially assumed about her based solely on her appearance. The realization was both uncomfortable and necessary. A forced confrontation with his own prejudices that no diversity training session or corporate workshop had ever achieved. As the aircraft made its approach to Keflavik International Airport, Anthony Pearson stared out the window at the stark Icelandic landscape below. The emergency diversion had thrown his carefully planned schedule into disarray, but that concern now seemed trivial compared to the passenger fighting for his life several rows behind him. The landing was flawless, smooth despite the expedited approach necessitated by the medical emergency. Jasmine's voice came over the intercom one final time before touchdown. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for priority landing at Keflavik. Medical personnel will board immediately upon arrival to attend to our passenger. Please remain seated to allow them quick access. We appreciate your cooperation during this situation." True to her word, the moment the aircraft reached the gate, the door opened and medical professionals rushed aboard. They efficiently transferred the patient to a stretcher, with Dr. Johnson providing a rapid medical briefing as they moved. As the medical team departed with the patient, a spontaneous round of applause broke out among the passengers, appreciation for both Dr. Johnson's life-saving intervention and the crew's professional handling of the emergency. The lead flight attendant then addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Washington has informed me that we'll need approximately 90 minutes on the ground while the aircraft is refueled and our flight plan recalculated. You're welcome to deplane and use the terminal facilities, but please don't leave the immediate gate area and listen for boarding announcements." As passengers began to exit, Anthony remained seated, lost in thought. The events of the day had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. His mind drifted back to his childhood in a small Connecticut town where his father, a banking executive, had often expressed views about keeping people in their proper places. Growing up, Anthony had absorbed these attitudes without questioning them, carrying them into his adult life and professional career like an invisible inheritance. Throughout his rise in the business world, he had surrounded himself with people who looked and thought like him, rarely challenged to examine his assumptions about those who didn't. His company had diversity initiatives, of course, mandatory training sessions he attended with barely concealed impatience, viewing them as political correctness rather than necessary education. Walter Green interrupted his thoughts as he prepared to deplane. "Coming to the terminal? I hear there's decent coffee in the main concourse." Anthony shook his head. "I think I'll stay here for a bit." Walter studied him for a moment. "Taking some time to reflect?" "Something like that," Anthony admitted. "Good," Walter said simply, then added, "Growth is uncomfortable, Mr. Pearson. That's how you know it's happening." After Walter left, Anthony pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his emails. A notification caught his attention. A news alert mentioning the flight number of his earlier Atlanta connection. Opening the link, he found himself looking at a viral social media post, video footage of his confrontation with Jasmine, already amassing thousands of comments condemning his behavior. His stomach tightened as he read the caption, "Watch this entitled passenger try to have a black woman removed from first class, then discover she's the captain of his next flight." The public humiliation he had feared was now reality. Worse still, several commenters had identified him by name, tagging his company. His professional reputation, something he had guarded zealously throughout his career, was now in jeopardy because of his own actions. Anthony began drafting an email to his company's public relations team, attempting to explain the situation, but found himself deleting and restarting multiple times. How could he explain behavior that he himself was beginning to recognize as indefensible? Through the aircraft windows, he caught sight of Jasmine and her first officer walking through the terminal, likely heading to the operations office to file updated flight plans. Despite the emergency diversion and the stress of the situation, she moved with confidence and purpose, stopping briefly to reassure concerned passengers they encountered. Anthony watched as a young black girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, approached Jasmine with wide-eyed admiration. Jasmine knelt to the child's level, speaking with her animatedly and then allowing her to touch the wings pinned to her uniform. The girl's expression of wonder and possibility was unmistakable, even from a distance. Something shifted inside Anthony as he observed this interaction, a recognition of the impact representation had on future generations. How many young girls would see themselves in Captain Washington? How many would pursue dreams they might otherwise have abandoned because they saw someone who looked like them succeeding in a field where they remained underrepresented? His thoughts were interrupted by a notification from his London client, inquiring about his delayed arrival. The message carried an undercurrent of impatience and frustration. 6 months ago, Anthony would have been consumed by anxiety over the potential business implications of this delay. Now, it seemed insignificant compared to the emergency that had necessitated it, and the personal reckoning he was experiencing. When boarding resumed 90 minutes later, Anthony returned to his seat with a different perspective than he'd had upon leaving Atlanta that morning. The change wasn't complete or perfect, decades of ingrained bias wouldn't dissolve in a single day, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that his worldview required serious examination. As passengers resettled, severe turbulence struck the aircraft. Drinks spilled, overhead bins rattled, and anxiety spread visibly through the cabin. Anthony gripped his armrests, his knuckles whitening as the plane bucked and dropped in the rough air. Through it all, Jasmine's voice remained steady over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some moderate to severe turbulence as we climb through this weather system. I've turned on the seatbelt sign, and I need everyone to return to their seats immediately. This is perfectly normal and not a cause for concern. We'll be through it shortly." True to her word, within minutes, the aircraft had risen above the turbulence into smooth air. Anthony gradually relaxed his grip, breathing deeply to calm himself. The incident had put everything into stark perspective. When facing potential danger, he hadn't cared about the race or gender of the person flying the plane, only their skill and competence, which Captain Washington had demonstrated repeatedly throughout the journey. As the flight continued toward London, Anthony began to understand that the real turbulence he needed to navigate wasn't in the air currents outside the aircraft, but in the assumptions and biases he had carried unexamined for far too long. The descent into London Heathrow occurred under overcast skies, light rain creating a glistening sheen on the runway. Despite the challenging weather conditions, the touchdown was remarkably smooth, a testament to Jasmine's skill in the cockpit. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, passengers began gathering their belongings, the shared experience of the emergency diversion having created an unusual sense of community among strangers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow Airport," Jasmine's voice announced over the intercom. "Local time is 8:45 p.m., and the temperature is 12 degrees Celsius. We apologize for the delay caused by our medical diversion to Iceland. I'm pleased to inform you that the passenger who experienced the medical emergency is now in stable condition at a hospital in Reykjavik, thanks to the quick actions of Dr. Johnson and our cabin crew." A spontaneous round of applause erupted throughout the cabin. "On behalf of our entire crew, I want to thank you for your patience and cooperation during this challenging flight. We know you have choices when you fly, and we appreciate you choosing us for your journey today." As passengers began to deplane, Anthony remained seated, allowing others to exit ahead of him. He had made a decision during the flight's final hours, one that felt both necessary and overdue. When nearly everyone had left, he gathered his belongings and moved toward the exit. At the aircraft door, Jasmine stood with her first officer and the lead flight attendant, thanking passengers as they deplaned. When Anthony approached, a flicker of recognition passed across her face, followed by a carefully neutral expression. "Thank you for flying with us today, sir," she said professionally, the same words she had offered every other passenger. Anthony paused. "Captain Washington, he began, his voice lower than usual, "I owe you an apology." Jasmine studied him carefully, saying nothing. "My behavior on the Atlanta flight was inexcusable," he continued. "I made assumptions about you based on, well, not on anything that should matter. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." For a moment, Jasmine remained silent, weighing his words. "Why are you apologizing now, Mr. Pearson? Because you discovered I'm a captain? Or because you realized your assumptions were unfounded?" It was a fair question, one that cut to the heart of whether his apology stemmed from genuine reflection or merely from the embarrassment of being proven wrong. "Both, honestly," Anthony admitted. "At first, it was the shock of discovering you were a captain. But during this flight, especially after the medical emergency, I've had time to think about the assumptions I make about people based on how they look. It's not something I'm proud of." Jasmine nodded slightly. "Acknowledgement is a start, but it's only that, a start." "I know," Anthony agreed. "I have a lot more thinking to do." "You should know," Jasmine informed him, "that the airline has launched an investigation into the incident. Several passengers submitted video recordings, and the flight attendants have filed reports." Anthony nodded. "I understand. Whatever consequences come from that, I'll accept them." "The airline may consider banning you from future flights," she continued. "That's standard procedure for discriminatory behavior towards staff or passengers." Anthony hadn't considered this possibility, though he realized he should have. The implications for his business travel were significant, but he found himself more concerned with the principle than the practicality. "That would be their right," he acknowledged. Jasmine studied him for another moment, then made a decision. "For what it's worth, I'll be recommending against that particular action." Anthony looked up in surprise. "You will? Why?" "Because banning you doesn't solve the underlying problem," she explained. "It doesn't change the attitudes that led to your behavior in the first place. It just moves those attitudes to another airline." She reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew a business card. "Our company has recently launched a corporate education program about unconscious bias and inclusive leadership. If you're serious about addressing the thinking that led to today's incident, this would be a place to start." Anthony accepted the card, reading the program details printed on its reverse side. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll look into this." "Good," Jasmine replied, extending her hand. "Safe travels in London, Mr. Pearson." He shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact, the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. As Anthony walked through the terminal toward customs, he felt lighter somehow, as if he had set down a burden he hadn't fully recognized he was carrying. The business meetings that had seemed so crucial that morning now felt secondary to the lesson he had learned at 38,000 feet. 6 months later, Anthony Pearson stood at a podium in his company's main conference room, addressing the executive leadership team and department heads during their annual strategy meeting. "When we talk about diversity and inclusion," he was saying, "we often frame it as something we're doing for others, for underrepresented groups, for social responsibility, for public relations. What we don't acknowledge is that these efforts benefit us as much as anyone else." On the screen behind him was a slide showing his company's improved performance metrics since implementing a more comprehensive diversity strategy, increased innovation, better employee retention, and stronger market adaptability. "6 months ago, I had an experience that forced me to confront my own biases," he continued, briefly recounting the incident with Jasmine without attempting to minimize his behavior or justify his actions. "It was uncomfortable and humiliating, but it was also necessary. It revealed blind spots I didn't know I had, assumptions I made without even realizing I was making them." Among his audience, some shifted uncomfortably while others nodded in recognition of their own unexamined biases. "Since then, I've participated in the airline's corporate education program on unconscious bias, and I've committed our company to partner with them to bring similar training here. Not as a one-time workshop we can check off a list, but as an ongoing commitment to challenging our assumptions about who belongs where and who can excel at what. Meanwhile, at an aviation career day at a predominantly black high school in Atlanta, Captain Jasmine Washington stood before a group of teenage girls, her uniform crisp and her wings gleaming under the auditorium lights. "When I was your age," she told them, "people told me there was no place for someone like me in a cockpit. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now. The sky belongs to all of us." A student raised her hand. "But how do you deal with people who still don't think you belong there?" Jasmine smiled, thinking of Anthony Pearson and countless others like him she had encountered throughout her career. "You prove them wrong every day, not just for yourself, but for everyone who will come after you. Every time you excel in a space where others think you don't belong, you make it a little easier for the next person who looks like you." She didn't share the specifics of the incident 6 months earlier, but she did tell them about the airline's new mentorship program for young women of color interested in aviation careers, a program she now headed, which had already connected dozens of aspiring pilots with experienced mentors in the industry. What neither Anthony nor Jasmine knew was that their paths would cross again. The corporate partnership Anthony had initiated with the airline's education program would eventually bring him to one of Jasmine's presentations for industry executives. There, they would acknowledge each other with the mutual respect of two people who had participated in an important, if initially painful, learning experience. One that had changed them both and, through their subsequent actions, begun to change others as well. The confrontation at 30,000 feet had been a microcosm of a larger societal reckoning, uncomfortable but necessary, challenging but ultimately transformative. It was a reminder that change happens not only through grand gestures and public policies but also through individual moments of recognition, accountability, and growth. This story reminds us that assumptions based on appearance reveal more about the person making them than those being judged. Captain Washington's journey shows how excellence remains the most powerful response to prejudice. When faced with discrimination, she didn't lower herself to anger or retaliation, she simply continued demonstrating her exceptional skill and professionalism. For Anthony, the confrontation forced him to experience the discomfort necessary for growth. His transformation highlights how meaningful change often requires direct experience rather than abstract learning. The medical emergency during the flight demonstrated how quickly superficial differences disappear when survival depends on competence rather than appearance. Perhaps most importantly, the story illustrates how representation matters, not just for those seeing themselves reflected in positions of authority, but for expanding everyone's understanding of who belongs where. Captain Washington's presence in the cockpit changed not only Anthony's perspective but potentially created ripples affecting countless others through both their actions following the incident. True progress happens when we recognize our biases, take responsibility for them, and commit to growth, not from shame, but from a genuine desire to see people as they truly are. Have you ever encountered someone who challenged your assumptions about who belongs in certain roles or spaces? Share your experience in the comments below. If Captain Washington's story inspired you, hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about overcoming discrimination and breaking barriers. Share this video with someone who might need this perspective today. Sometimes seeing our biases through stories helps us recognize them in real life. Thank you for joining us on this journey toward greater understanding and a more inclusive world. Together, we can create change one conversation at a time.